important principle that we are not the body. Let's check that everything's working here. All right. Start with Jai Radha Madhava. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janavalabha Girivaradari Gopi Janavalabha Girivaradari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Jaya Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajikacharya. Jaya Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajikacharya. Astotra Shadashi Shimatis Divine Grace. A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Skaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopinath Shamakun Radhakun Giri Govardhan Ki Jai. Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Navadvip Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Ganga Maya Ki Jai. Yamuna Maya Ki Jai. Tulasi Devi Maharani Ki Jai. Samaveta Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. All glories to all the assembled devotees. All glories to all the assembled devotees. All glories to all the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru, Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. So today we are reading Bhagavad-gita, chapter 2, text 13. There it is right there, a very famous verse. One of the first verses that I ever memorized. Maybe the second. Definitely in the first three that I memorized. One was the peace formula, one was this verse, and there was one other, I can't remember what that was. In fact, it might have been the verse about the higher taste. I think these are the first three verses that I memorized, so it's great to recap these things. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Trying to make it all fit in one place. Almost there. Let's try another track. What's this? Did that work? Okay, there we go. That's a bit smaller, but put it all on one page. There we go. Dehinosmin yata dehe Komaram yovanam jara Tata dehantara praptir Dhiras tatra namuyati Dehinosmin yata dehe Komaram yovanam jara Tata dehantara praptir Dhiras tatra namuyati. Word by word. Dehinaha, of the embodied. Asmin, in this. Yatha, as. Dehe, in the body. Komaram, boyhood. Yovanam, youth. Jara, old age. Tata, similarly. Deha antara, of transference of the body. Praptihi, achievement. Dhiraha, the sober. Tatra, thereupon. Na, never. Muyati, is bewildered. Translation. As the embodied soul continuously passes in this body, from boyhood to youth to old age, the soul similarly passes into another body at death. A sober person is not bewildered by such a change. Purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Since every living entity is a spiritual individual soul, each is changing his body every moment, manifesting sometimes as a child. I'm not sure what happened there. I didn't do that. I'll start again. Since every living entity is an individual soul, each is changing his body every moment, manifesting sometimes as a child, sometimes as a youth, and sometimes as an old man. Yet the same spirit soul is there and does not undergo any change. The individual soul finally changes the body at death and transmigrates to another body. And since it is sure to have another body in the next birth, either material or spiritual, there was no cause for lamentation by Arjuna on account of death, neither for Bhishma nor for Drona, for whom he was so much concerned. Rather, he should rejoice for their changing bodies from old to new ones, thereby rejuvenating their energy. Such changes of body account for varieties of enjoyment or suffering according to one's work in life. So Bhishma and Drona, being noble souls, were surely going to have spiritual bodies in the next life, or at least life in heavenly bodies, for superior enjoyment of material existence. So in either case, there was no cause for lamentation. It's quite a long purport, so I'll respond section at a time. Om Jnanatamurandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshu Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So this first part here is echoing what the translation is saying, that if we're looking for evidence of reincarnation, we can observe it in this life itself. People say, oh, if you believe in reincarnation, show me where people have changed their body. So here we have the scientific evidence that in this life we are changing bodies. This body that I'm in now, this 51-year-old body, is not the same as my 15-year-old body. Quite a different person, quite a different waistline, quite a different colored hair, quite different eyesight capabilities, many differences. So there is some resemblance of the previous body. My 15-year-old body and my 51-year-old body, if you put them side by side, you can see some common elements, some things that are in common. And in the same way, when somebody moves on from one body to the other, because of their subtle body, then the subtle body creates the gross body. Just like when you put a glove on your hand, that glove has the same shape as the hand. In the same way, the subtle body, our intelligence, our consciousness creates the type of body we have in our next life. And it's natural that the consciousness that we have in this life, it flows through to the following life. And so we can see that in this life as well, the actions that we take in our younger years affect the results we get in our older years. Those that abuse their bodies when they're younger, they suffer more in their old age. Those who keep themselves healthy when they're young, then naturally as they're older, their body will, also be healthy, and so on. So this is the law of karma. Sometimes people think, oh, you're going to get bad karma in your next life. But our next life is happening at every moment. If we overeat right now, we get a stomach ache immediately or within a few minutes. So this concept of karma doesn't depend on the next life. And because we're changing bodies at every moment in this life, it's like we're having a new life continuously. So therefore, some of the actions that we perform, we get the reaction immediately. Some of these reactions we get later in life. As I was explaining, those that, misuse their body, abuse their body when they're young, they suffer the reactions while they're young, but also as they get older. And some of the actions that we perform, we don't get the reactions of those until the next life. So this is just some empirical evidence that we can observe in this life, that actually this body is nothing like the body I had when I was a baby, but I'm the same person. And so it gives us a hint that there's actually a soul. And as we've changed in this life through all these different types of bodies, why would it be different at the time of death? It's natural that the soul would continue on to another body as it has been doing throughout the whole lifetime. So this is a very tangible argument that Krishna gives for the existence of the soul, and understanding that the body and the soul, the person and the body, are not the same. And therefore, in the context of Bhagavad-gita, he's explaining to Arjuna, look, you don't have to worry about Bhishma or Drona being killed, because they won't be killed. Their souls will continue on to other bodies. And because they're very advanced personalities, how does Prabhupada explain it here? Noble souls. For some reason, they ended up on the wrong side of the battle by Krishna's arrangement, the wrong side. But still, they were noble souls. And we can see, particularly Bhishma Dev, lying on the bed of arrows, staring at Krishna with incredible devotion as he left his body. So certainly, he'll achieve Krishna's shelter. And Drona also was another great personality who trained the Pandavas in military arts. He was also a very advanced Brahmana, and he would also get a superior destination in the next life. So Arjuna doesn't have to worry about those things. So this is the point that Krishna is really emphasizing here, that you're not the body. Bhishma and Drona are not the body either. So when the bodies that they're in now are finished, they'll continue on to a new body, which is actually an advantage. In the Vedic times, they had these yagyas, horse sacrifices and cow sacrifices. And you might think, whoa, that's pretty horrific or whatever. But actually, in these sacrifices, they used to sacrifice an animal, and through the power of mantra, they used to bring the animal back to life in a renewed body. So even though the cow or the horse, may be a little old, but by this yagya, they were able to have a new life with a young, refreshed body. There's a similar situation here. Just talking about this point of reincarnation again, I recently heard the story of a devotee in the UK, disciple of His Holiness Bhakti True Swami, and I only heard it once, so I may get some details wrong, but I think the essence will be clear. And I was telling this story to someone recently who I just met, who asked me if we believe in reincarnation. So this is an amazing story. You may have heard different cases where a child remembers their previous life. In fact, in one of the first Bhagavad-gita classes I gave on this channel, a second or third class perhaps, I included a snippet. I took a video from Arjuna's channel, Theology Unleashed, on YouTube. You can look it up. And in one of his videos, he was sharing different examples of children that remembered their previous lives. And that was amazing. I shared that in that previous class. So when I was at the loft, Chandidas Prabhu was giving his class. I forget what the actual topic was, but he ended the class with this amazing story of this devotee Ratnavali. And the basic things that I can remember from the story is that when she was young, she was just attacked out of the blue when she was in the park. And she was being beaten by someone with a big piece of wood with nails in it, or something like that, something horrific. And as she was being beaten, she was praying, or she heard a voice that said, "Pretend you're dead." And from that time, she was wondering, what was that voice? Where did that come from? So later on in her life, she was born, I believe, in a Gujarati body, some kind of Indian body in the UK. And at some point, she went to the Hare Krishna temple. And when she went there, she just felt like, this is my place, and I'm going to surrender my life to this. I don't even really know what it is, but I know I want to surrender myself to this. And so she really felt a connection to this place, as if she'd been there before. And I forget exactly what else. There were some other things that happened to her. Like she had this, you could say, irrational fear of dogs. That she was just really frightened of dogs her whole life, for some reason. And she used to have some recurring dreams. One was of a spiral staircase, and another one was looking out over a field of grass. I forget exactly what that was. And forgive me for not knowing all the details in great depth, but it's a very fascinating story. So anyway, at some point after becoming a devotee, someone suggested that, you're having these dreams and things like that. Why don't you do a hypnotic regression, which is a process by which a hypnotist takes the person back through their life to when they were younger, to when they were a child, to the time of birth until their previous life. So through this hypnotic regression process, it's possible to access information about the previous life. So through this process, this devotee was able to find out more information that actually, in her previous life, she had been a brahmachari in Scotland. And in Scotland. So when she found this information out, then she went to that place in Scotland where this brahmachari had been to try to find out more information. And when she got there, she found out that this brahmachari had died in a car accident. So she went to the hospital to look up the records to find out what happened. And in the records, it showed that he had been, in the accident, his stomach had been cut open, and he had some serious injuries in that area. And this devotee in this life, she had a birthmark on her waist, on her stomach area, and she had a lot of digestive problems. And you can see the connection, from her previous life and the way that she had died when she was the brahmachari in the previous life. It had its effect was continuing on into the next life, even in her next body. So she went to the temple also in Scotland, and she saw that staircase that she'd been seeing in her recurring dreams. And then she went to the place where that brahmachari lived. I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of that brahmachari. But there are pictures of this person as the brahmachari, as well as the picture of this person now in the female Indian body. So she went to the house where this person lived, and she was like, oh, but where's that grass? So she went up, and then when she looked out the window from that person's house, then she could see this field that had also been in her memory. She spoke with some devotees who knew that brahmachari, and one of them said, yeah, I was cooking with this brahmachari one time, and he came in to me and says, oh, I just got attacked by a dog. So from that time onwards, he was always afraid of dogs. And then, so Ratnavali, she understood, oh, yes, this is why I'm so afraid of dogs, because in my previous life, I was attacked by a dog and injured, and, therefore, that's where that fear comes from. So these amazing connections. My sons have heard this pastime of Ratnavali from their teacher Dharmasetu. So he knows the details a lot better than me. But even in my imperfect way, I'm sure you can pick up some of these amazing evidence of how we can go from one life to the next, and sometimes the memories continue on. And then another interesting thing was that one time, Ratnavali was initiated by His Holiness Bhakti Swami. And we understand that in the Bhagavad-gita it says, whatever you think of at the time of death, that you'll become in the next life. Antakale chamameva. Oh, those who remember me at the time of death come to me. But it also explains that whatever you think of, that's what you become. And so the understanding is that when someone is very attached to their husband or wife, then in the next life, they may become, the opposite gender. So someone is a man in this life and he's thinking of his wife, or really absorbed in thoughts of a woman. In his next life, he could become a woman. So Bhakti Swami, he joked with Ratnavali and said, so who were you thinking of at the time of death that you became a woman in this life? So you might think, oh, okay, that's just a joke, right? But actually in this case, she was able to verify and answer that question. So she found out that this brahmachari from Scotland was fond of a particular lady that he was, he liked. And so he was able to track down that woman and that devotee lady and ask her, do you remember this brahmachari? And, do you know anything about him? So she said, well, actually, I remember him, but not very well. Or even she might not have even remembered him at all. But the really interesting thing was, this lady who the brahmachari had been thinking of looked very similar to this Ratnavali in this life. So again, we can see that the consciousness that we have at the time of our death, it flows through to our next life. So not only was he thinking of a woman, and therefore he became a woman in the next life, but he had a particular woman in mind, and then in the next life, he took the form very similar to that woman that he was thinking of. They had very similar appearance. So I'm sure there's many more details, and I hope that this devotee, Ratnavali, can write a book, or someone can make a video or write a book about this, because it's such amazing evidence for reincarnation, and particularly in Krishna consciousness. This is not just some random person from a previous age, like we can read about in the Bhagavatam some of these pastimes, and we think, oh yeah, okay, there's some nice moral stories from the ancient time. Probably someone just even made it up. This is a tendency that we discount things which are ancient or from another culture. But when it's somebody who's living amongst us that we can actually go and meet and shake hands with and talk to, and hear these types of events of remembering the previous life, it's such a powerful confirmation of this idea of reincarnation. And in Krishna consciousness, showing that this person, as a brahmachari, had made advancement to a certain point, and in the next life was able to continue that path of devotional service. And that's why when she heard that voice, and she went to the temple and immediately felt, yes, this is my place. And she was able to just pick up and continue her devotional service in her new body. So it's tricky to talk about these pastimes because the gender is changing from life to life. But this is also another point that comes from this, is that in one life we may be a man, in another life we may be a woman. In one life we may be Scottish, in one life we may be Indian, or any other combinations that may be there. And so nowadays there's this big issue of the transgender thing that's talked about a lot. And part of the issue here is that some people say that if someone identifies as a woman, then they should change their body to be like a woman. If someone is a woman and wants and feels like they are a man, they should change their body to become like a man. So this can naturally happen at the time of death. We can take a new body. But when we understand that actually I'm not the body, I'm the spirit soul, we won't be so concerned with changing the physical body. We can just accept the body we have and focus more on the internals. And so this is something reassuring from this Bhagavad-gita, is that people are really trying to find their identity. Who am I? Who am I really? So I was born with a man's body, but maybe I'm really a woman. Maybe that's why I'm not happy. It's because I'm in the wrong body. I need to be in a different body. So Bhagavad-gita is teaching us that actually we are in the wrong body. All of us. We're all in the material body. We should be in a spiritual body. But that the solution is not to try to change the material body. The solution is to how should we say? Connect again with our real spiritual body. We need to connect with the soul. Who we really are has nothing to do with this body. We're an eternal servant of Krishna, and we have a special relationship with Krishna that we've forgotten, that we don't know about right now. And through the process of Krishna consciousness, we can be established in a place where our body on the outside and on the inside is the same. It's fully spiritual. So whereas now all of us are in an uncomfortable situation, we're all spirit souls, but we're all in these these bodies which are not us. Whereas in the spiritual world, the body that we have is really us. That's our real, our true identity. So at the same time, while we're in this world, we have different bodies, and we're like actors in a play. And we need to see, okay, well, if I have this body, what's the best way I can play my role while I'm developing my Krishna consciousness? How can I serve Krishna with the body that I've got? Yeah, so this is a Krishna conscious perspective on this idea of these different bodies. Yes, we understand this body is not me, but I will use this body in the best way I can to serve Lord Krishna. Just pause for a moment. I see there's a few people listening. If you could just say Hare Krishna or introduce yourself in the chat. That'll be nice. It's always good to know who I'm speaking with. We often have some regulars, but perhaps you're just passing by, and it would be nice to know who's listening in. So on this point about taking care of the body, using the body in the service of Lord Krishna, one thing is we have to take care of it properly. And in the previous class on this channel, Atmananda Prabhu was speaking, and he was talking about how he was doing a little exercise. He said, just let's stop for a moment and feel. Do you feel any tension in any part of your body? And at first we might think, why is he talking about the body? Like we're supposed to be about the soul, and he's talking about the body. Hare Krishna Bhari Bhajan Prabhu, thanks for letting me know you're listening. That's great. Nice to have you here. Hare Krishna. So I was thinking about this idea, and I was thinking just like a pilot. When a pilot's flying a plane, he has to take care of that plane so that it can serve its purpose. So just like us, we're souls in a body. Sometimes it's described like we're, driving a car. But I was thinking like a plane, because when someone's flying a plane, they have to be very aware of what's going on in that plane. And there's all of these lights and switches and dials. And so in a similar way, we're in this body and we need to be aware of what's going on with this body so that we can take care of it properly and get to the destination that we're after. So anyway, that was just a reflection on Atmananda Prabhu's class last time. And, that these bodies are given to us by Krishna, so therefore we should take care of them. And we should look out for warning signs in case, things are not going quite right. Emotionally, we can check in with ourselves. Are we situated properly? So all of these things you might say are on the material platform, but because we have this vehicle that we want to use in Krishna's service, we want to maintain that vehicle, the physical body and the emotional body, so that we're in the best condition to serve Lord Krishna to the best of our ability. All right, I'll continue a little bit on with the purport here. And that was just emphasizing mostly the idea that we're not the body and that we have this tangible experience of changing bodies even in this life. And therefore it's not a big stretch to imagine that we go to another body at the end of this life. And while we have this body, we should make the best use of it and understand that we've been given a particular body, and each body has got its advantages and disadvantages. And so instead of thinking that I should change to another body, that'll solve my problems in life, rather we should understand, okay, this is the body I've got. What's the best way I can use it? Make the best use of a bad bargain for the service of the Lord. And then, of course, Krishna was explaining to Arjuna that Bhishma and Drona will continue to another life, and because they are good people, noble souls, they'll certainly go to a better destination, so you don't need to worry about them dying in the battle. So let's continue. So any man who has perfect knowledge of the constitution of the individual soul, the spirit soul, and nature, I'll say that again. Any man who has perfect knowledge of the constitution of the individual soul, the super soul, and nature, both material and spiritual, is called a dhira, or a most sober man. Such a man is never bewildered by the change of bodies. So like I was already speaking previously about how people these days are disturbed because of the body that they're in, and they're very much identifying with the external body or the subtle body. By that I mean, going back to the gender idea. This body may be a woman's body, but my subtle body is feeling like has more of the nature of a whatever the opposite of what I just said. A man's body, woman's mind, a woman's body, man's mind, and therefore there's some disturbance. It's called gender dysphoria. It's a mental condition, Just like when somebody thinks that they're a tiger or some other animal, this is a type of a mental imbalance. This is not dira. This is a disturbance. And unfortunately, there is, in society today, there's a deliberate movement to create this disturbance in people's minds. So rather than training people to be sober and dira and to be satisfied with what they are, what they've been given, instead there's this movement to say, oh, you shouldn't be satisfied with what you've got. You should consider yourself a victim. If you're born in a black body, then that means that you're a victim, and therefore you should feel badly towards the white people. Or if you're a white person, you should feel guilty because your ancestors abused the black people. And getting into this real bodily concept of life, and thinking that your problems are because of your body, and that if we had a different body, that would solve the problem. No, this is not soberness. This is called disturbed mind. And we can see that even in India, people may be born in a situation which is less than ideal. But when they understand this principle of this verse of Bhagavad-gita, that actually I'm not the body. Due to my karma, I've been given this particular situation, and therefore I will do my best to serve Lord Krishna in this situation. This is called soberness, not disturbance or agitation. These are opposite words to the word sober. Sober means not intoxicated, not disturbed, and peaceful. Whereas today we can see that there's so many things that are pushing on people to make them more agitated, to make them more confused. That's another thing about a sober person, is that they see things clearly as they are. They're not an illusion. They're not intoxicated or confused about what's going on. So this Krishna consciousness movement is so needed in the world today. When people can understand that you are not a man or a woman, black or white, you are a spirit soul, and we're all brothers. We're all children of God. This understanding is so powerful for bringing peace in the world. And we can see in Prabhupada's 7 Purposes of ISKCON, he really emphasized how by practicing chanting of Hare Krishna, reading the scriptures, and understanding these basic points of spiritual life, that we're all individual spirit souls, eternal servants of Krishna. When we can all understand this, and we can train people in these understandings and how to apply it in our life, this is how we can have real unity and peace in the world. Because as people become more sober, they become more peaceful. So I thought this is a short paragraph, but it's very profound, this idea of being sober, not being disturbed by little things, and seeing things as they are. All right. So now we'll move into the next section where we get into the Mayavadi philosophy. The Mayavadi theory of oneness of the spirit soul cannot be entertained on the ground that the spirit soul cannot be cut into pieces as a fragmental portion. Such cutting into different individual souls would make the supreme cleavable or changeable, against the principle of the supreme souls being unchangeable. As confirmed in the Gita, the fragmental portions of the supreme exist eternally and are called kshara. That is, they have a tendency to fall down into material nature. These fragmental portions are eternally so, and even after liberation, the individual soul remains the same, fragmental. But once liberated, he lives in eternal life in bliss and knowledge with the Supreme Godhead, with the personality of Godhead. The theory of reflection can be applied to the Supersoul, who is present in each and every individual body and is known as the Paramatma. He is different from the individual living entity. He is different from the individual living entity. When the sky is reflected in water, the reflections represent both the sun and the moon and the stars also. The stars can be compared to the living entities, and the sun or the moon to the Supreme Lord. The individual fragmental spirit soul is represented by Arjuna, and the Supreme Soul is the personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. Or Sri Krishna, yes. So I'll just pause there for a moment because Prabhupada's getting into some quite philosophical detail here. Let me just grab something. So first of all, Prabhupada's quoting from another section of the Bhagavad-gita, which I will just look up now. And this is the part where, in the Bhagavad-gita, it says that the soul is eternally fragmental part. I believe it's 15.7. Let's just have a potluck go here and hope it's the right verse. Yes, this is the one. All right. My memory may not be what it used to be, but at least I could remember this verse. Mamai vangsa jiva loke jiva bhuta sanatana mana shastran indriyani prakriti stani kashati. Translation: the living entities in this conditioned world are my eternal fragmental parts. So we'll just focus on this part here. This is what Prabhupada's talking about in this other purport. Amsa means a fragmental particle. Sanatana means eternal. So what this verse is saying is that the soul is always simultaneously one and different from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Mayavadis have a different idea. Their idea is that there's like this impersonal Brahman, like oneness. And somehow or other, this oneness becomes covered by Maya and becomes the jivas. But that means that the soul can be cut or broken. We'll go back to the original verse where Prabhupada's referring to this. He's sort of jumping ahead to discuss this. I'll just minimize myself. No, that's not the one. This one, here we go. I'll make it a little bit bigger. There's a lot of words here. Okay. So, Prabhupada is talking about it here. He's saying that on the basis of 15.7, the Mayavadi philosophy cannot be accepted because the spirit soul cannot be cut into pieces. Because why? It's also described in other verses about the Supreme Personality of Godhead and about the spirit soul itself. Yes, in this chapter 2, it's also explaining the soul cannot be burnt, the soul cannot be cut, the soul cannot be made wet. It cannot, so many things. So this thing about the soul cannot be cut, if the Mayavadi idea that God is one, but then the individuals are covered by Maya, that means that it's the soul is being cut. But no, it's described in Bhagavad Gita that these individual souls are always there. There's an eternal connection of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the fragmental parts. So, of course, when we talk about eternality, it's very hard to understand because it's beyond our conception. But the Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva philosophy, that all the living entities, they're all connected to Krishna in one sense, but they're also individual at the same time. So anyway, Prabhupada's emphasizing this idea that no, the soul cannot be cut. Therefore, the Mayavadi philosophy is not accepted based on Bhagavad Gita. And Prabhupada expands on it too to say that the fragmental portions have the potential to fall down into material nature. So some of these fragmental portions remain in the spiritual world all the time. In fact, the majority. Some come under the material energy, but the ones that are under the material energy have their eternal nature in relationship with Krishna. And when they can awaken that, then they can again return to the spiritual world where there is no material coverings, just pure spiritual life. Now, this theory of reflection, I have not heard about this so much. So let me just have a look at if there's any hints here about the theory of reflection. Okay, so it's not mentioned in this book. Anyway, what I would, there are some things to say about it just from what Prabhupada's written here. When the sky is reflected in the water, the sun and the moon are still separate. They're separate in their original condition. The sun and the stars are individually existing in the sky, and when they're reflected into the water, they are still individually represented. So perhaps that's the point that's being made here. Another thing to think about, I remember one time I asked Tamar Krishnaraj, I was like, what happens to the super soul when we go back to Godhead? And his answer was, don't worry about what happens to the super soul, worry about what happens to you. But I've always felt like the Paramatma, it's described here, the theory of reflection and the Paramatma. So just like when there's one sun, but it can be reflected in many vessels of water, like there's a pot here and a pot here and a pot here with water, there's a huge lake with water there. When that vessel is no longer there, because like we go back to the spiritual world, it's not that the Paramatma has disappeared. The Paramatma is always one. So in that way, I was understanding this idea that in the spirit, in the material world, Krishna is right with us in the form of the Paramatma. And when we go back to the spiritual world, the Paramatma and Krishna is still existing, but now we have the direct relationship with Krishna. Okay. So now the final point here. I'll just make it like this again, so that it's a bit easier for me to read it. And I'll make it a bit bigger. Okay. So this is the final point that Prabhupada makes in this purport. Krishna and Arjuna are not on the same level, as it will be apparent in the beginning of the 4th chapter. If Arjuna is on the same level with Krishna, and Krishna is not superior to Arjuna, then their relationship of instructor and instructed becomes meaningless. If both of them are deluded by the illusory energy Maya, then there's no need of one being the instructor and the other the instructed. Such instruction would be useless, because in the clutches of Maya, no one can be an authoritative instructor. Under the circumstances, it is admitted that Lord Krishna is the Supreme Lord, superior in position to the living entity Arjuna, who is a forgetful soul deluded by Maya. It just makes me think of this example given in many places in the world, but particularly in the Bhagavatam, of the blind leading the blind. So if someone doesn't know something and they're trying to guide someone else who also is blind and doesn't know what's going on, the tendency is to end up in a ditch, to get in trouble, to have problems. And this is what is being explained here, that Krishna is not just another conditioned soul. Krishna is far superior to Arjuna. He's a supreme personality of Godhead, not covered by Maya at all. He's Maheshwara. He is the master of Maya. And so when we hear from Krishna, or we hear directly from Krishna, or we can hear from his representative or through his books, then the information is coming from a bona fide source. It's just like if there's two people that are trying to fix a car, like mechanics, and neither of them has a clue how a car works. That they could probably take it apart, but then they wouldn't be able to put it back together, and certainly wouldn't be able to fix any of the problems. And so we can see that this is what's happening in the world today, that there's people who are in ignorance, and who are completely bewildered by so many different influences. And they're trying to propose that they have the solution to the problems of this world, and yet they're just making things worse. So the solution here is that we shouldn't pin our hopes on those who are in Maya, under the influence of the material energy, but we should try to seek our source from the eternally true sources of information, directly from Krishna, from the Shastra, and from those who are in the line of disciplic succession from Krishna. It's a descending process, a process where someone who is in full knowledge shares to those who are in ignorance. This is as opposed to the ascending process of knowledge, where we have a theory about something, and we experiment. And then from our experiment, we can see, oh, okay, we were right or we were wrong. Or maybe we were right, but we're not sure exactly. We have to do the experiment again because it could be all these reasons. And, this is the modern scientific process. Science is a word that's bandied around a lot today. Trust the science. And, in previous classes, some people said, oh, we don't want to be seen as anti-science. We'll be seen as Luddites, I believe the word is. People who are very foolish and backwards and ignorant. But actually, we are anti-science. Everything is in definitions, right? If we talk about science as the pursuit of the truth, well, certainly we are pro-science. But if we take science to mean that we only accept those things that can be verified, that we verify by experimentation, then no, we are not pro-science, because this is just speculation and is prone to the defects of this material body. We make mistakes. We become illusioned. We have imperfect senses. And there's a propensity to cheat, which has been very prominent, in recent years. So if we think that our understanding of the world is going to be through science, then we are setting ourselves up for disappointment and for being misled. The blind leading the blind. It's impossible for scientists to describe the spiritual world. It's totally beyond their capacity. And even this material energy is so vast and complex that the experimental process will never give us complete knowledge. You might have noticed that even in very basic things, what's called the science, the science is in, the science is settled. Whenever you hear things like this, you can know that someone's lying to you, because the science is never settled. The material scientific process is based on the idea that, well, this is the best we've come up with yet, but in the future we'll find something even better than this. It's never perfect and complete. Whereas when we hear directly from the spiritual source, from Lord Krishna and his representatives, his pure representatives from the Shastra, we can understand that this knowledge is coming from a true source. It's not under the influence of the material imperfections. It's not like we'll read the Bhagavatam and then it'll say, yeah, this is how things are. And then a few chapters later, actually, a few chapters ago, we told you it was like this, but now we realize it's not exactly like that. It's actually like this. No, that's not the nature of the Shastra. The Shastra is very definitive and clear. It makes life a lot more simple, makes it a lot more easy to be sober. Even like just thinking about diet, many years ago, what was considered a healthy diet was replaced by another idea. It was like, at one point it was said, oh, fat is not good, so we shouldn't eat fat. And then, a few years later, oh, no, actually we were wrong. Fat is good, but not that kind of fat, this kind of fat. And then a few years later, oh, no, not that kind of fat, this kind of fat. Anyway, I'm just trying to think of an example. I know that diet is a classic where every few years the complete opposite of what was taught before is being taught. You got to eat carbs, avoid fat, avoid carbs, eat fat. You have to eat a lot of meat. Oh, now you have to be a vegan. It's like all of these different speculations are going on. Whereas if we hear from the source, even in terms of medicine, if we can hear from Ayurveda, then this is principles which are beyond time. And that gives us a much better foundation for living our life in a true way instead of being misled and ending up in a ditch. But it all comes back to this point that this Bhagavad-gita is spoken by Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and therefore we should take it seriously. This is not just some speculator speaking. Krishna is not just another person. And Krishna makes it very clear in the Bhagavad-gita about his position, and therefore we should take it seriously ahead of the ideas of those who are speculating. Sometimes in practical matters we have to learn from those who are practicing material science to the best of their abilities, on a very kind of gross level, that the Bhagavad-gita doesn't get into those details. But we always need to come back to the principles that we hear from Bhagavad-gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, so that whatever we learn, even on the mundane level, is aligned with the original spiritual knowledge coming from Krishna. So I'll just read the verse again and I'll summarize. So Bhagavad-gita, chapter 2, text 13. Dehinosmin yata dehe komaram yovanam jara tata dehantara praptir dhiras tatra namuyati. And if anyone has any questions, it's your last chance live to type in something. Otherwise, if you type it in watching the replay, I'll respond later. Okay. And then translation. As the embodied soul continuously passes in this body from boyhood to youth to old age, the soul similarly passes into another body at death. A sober person is not bewildered by such a change. So Prabhupada is emphasizing in his purport here how we are individual souls and we are changing bodies all the time in this life. But so the body's changing, but the soul is not changing. And at the time of death, we continue the process by going into another body, either material or spiritual. And therefore, Arjuna doesn't need to feel bad if Bhishma or Drona are killed, because they will have a better destination after their death. And with this understanding, we can become sober. We don't need to worry that, I'm in the wrong body. I wish I had another body. We make the best use of whatever body we're in, understanding that it's the soul who's our real self. And that's where we should be focusing our energy in terms of perfecting our life. If we really want happiness, it's coming from the soul, not from the body. And then Prabhupada mentions how the individual soul can never become the supreme soul, and the supreme soul can never be cut. So the Mayavadi theory is defeated here. And then finally, Prabhupada's making the point that Krishna is superior to all of us. He's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And therefore we should listen to him because his words are coming from they are the true original source of all knowledge. It's not a speculation of another conditioned soul. So, very full of meaning, this verse, very practical to observe, and Prabhupada's brought out so many amazing points here that we need to be sober. Don't worry about what's happening to the body. We make the best of a bad bargain, and then we hear from Krishna and apply what he teaches us, because he is the perfect Supreme Personality of Godhead, the source of all perfect truth. All right, so I'll end here. Thank you very much. Thank you to Arjuna and Buru Bojan for commenting. Hare Krishna. And if there's any other comments, I'll check on Facebook later. or even on YouTube, and continue the conversation. Until next time, Hare Krishna. Jai Srila Prabhupada.